Chapter 46. Arrival. With teary eyes, Rebecca asked,
"My brother."
He said he'll be here in half an hour. Don't worry.
Rebecca felt a bitter feeling inside her chest. She met and fell in love with her husband in college, and they got married after graduation. Her parents and brother didn't approve of their marriage. Ignoring her family's objections, she joined her husband in Oceanian under his vows of eternal love. Over the past 2 years, her brother and parents had made countless calls urging her to come home. She said she'd show them that she would be happy in Oceanian. Her parents remained silent, and only her brother made one request. He told her not to tell her husband about her family's wealth for the first 2 years as a test. Rebecca was the family's treasure, and she had been pampered all her life without doing a day's work. After settling in Oceanian, she took advice from her mother-in-law and strived to be a good wife and mother. Every time she called her mother to tell the latter that she'd learned to cook, clean, and scrub the floors until they sparkled, her mother would cry, saying that she had been raised in luxury, not for such menial tasks. But Rebecca didn't mind. As long as they could make it through 2 years, she would bring her husband home, and they would reunite as a family. But never in a million years did she imagine that she might die here, all because of a mere $70,000. At this moment, she finally understood what her parents meant. She was degrading herself. Rebecca tried to look at Keira again. She wanted to remember the face of her savior. Just then, she heard her husband's voice.
"Do you think you can get any benefits from helping her, in anticipation that her brother would reward you? You are dreaming. Her family has no money, even if they do come, knowing how much it costs. They would only give up. As for you, they would feel you are meddling in their business."
Rebecca's vision grew dark with anger. She pleaded,
"My brother won't abandon me. Honey, my family has money. For the sake of our years together, hand it over to my brother. You can have my house."
"Your house?"
her husband sneered.
"That house was bought after we got married and is considered a joint property. Besides, when we graduated from college, you were eager to elope with me to marry me. Your family doesn't love you, which is why you ran away from the home out of the desperation. Am I right? In these 2 years, you were never kept in touch with your family. Why would your brother take care of you?"
Eager to elope? Rebecca felt a surge of anger. She struggled to breathe and fainted. Seeing that she seemed to have stopped breathing, Keira immediately stepped forward.
She needs resuscitation.
"She doesn't need resuscitation."
Her husband abruptly stepped back and shouted,
"My wife once said that she didn't want to die in a terrible state if she is seriously ill. She chooses to die naturally and doesn't accept any measures of resuscitation. Don't interfere with our private matters."
Upon hearing this, Keira clenched her fists tightly. What a vicious man. The mother-in-law also rushed forward, standing directly between Keira and the man.
"What are you doing? Everyone, come and see. My daughter-in-law is dying, and her last wish is to die at home. But this person won't let us leave."
She yelled very loudly, prompting patients and nurses around them to crowd around. Seeing this, the mother-in-law cried even harder.
"Rebecca, why is your life so miserable? If this person hadn't meddled in our affairs and delayed us, you wouldn't have died in the hospital."
Keira frowned, knowing that arguing with them now would only waste time. She rushed to the husband and reached out to grab the unconscious Rebecca. The husband tried to retreat, but Keira dislocated his arm. Rebecca slipped from his arms. Keira caught her and immediately started cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The head nurse rushed over when she heard the commotion.
What's happening?"
The mother-in-law started crying and shouting.
"Help us! My son and daughter-in-law have decided to give up treatment. This stranger won't let us go."
With his arm dislocated, the husband was sweating with pain. Hearing the head nurse's question, he cried out,
"I'm her guardian. Before she lost consciousness, she told me that she found the illness unbearable and didn't want to be resuscitated. She wanted to die with dignity. Look at what this woman is doing. Does my wife not even have the right to give up treatment?
The head nurse frowned, walking over to Keira.
Miss, you...
While performing CPR, Keira said,
This woman doesn't want to die. I have called her brother, and he'll be here soon.
The head nurse, equally anxious to save a life, quickly added,
Her brother is also her family, and therefore her guardian. If her brother does not give up on resuscitation, we can continue the rescue.
This statement stunned the husband and the mother-in-law. Isla, standing nearby, slowly spoke up.
Oh, Keira, you shouldn't be forcing people like this. Even if she recovers, the surgery would cost a small fortune, and the subsequent costs for rehabilitation are unknown. Both the deceased and her husband have given up. Why did you insist on calling her brother? Even if he gets here, what's the point? Every family has its own difficulties. You can't morally kidnap others here.
The husband suddenly understood something and started crying out.
We don't have any money. And my brother-in-law's family is also poor. The surgery itself costs 70,000 and monthly treatment expenses are up to 10,000. My wife didn't want to burden us and her family. I'm so useless. I can only watch my wife die.
The cries of a grown man were quite moving. Every year, countless patients in the hospital chose to give up treatment. They had the right to choose death, and those around them immediately started accusing Keira.
This woman is so young and hasn't experienced the hardships of society.
She's so naive. With her foolish enthusiasm, she's just denying someone's burial.
Wouldn't this be considered as a crime of damaging the deceased body?
The mother-in-law continued to scream.
Everyone, help me to pull her away! Security, come quickly! Someone here is tampering with a corpse!
As the security guard approached Keira, she spun around angrily, glaring at everyone nearby.
You are all plotting for wealth while causing a death.
The security guard paused, but the mother-in-law seized the opportunity, rushing over and pulling at Keira's hair, trying to drag her away.
Let go of my daughter-in-law! Don't touch her body!
She couldn't let Rebecca be saved. Keira's scalp throbbed uncomfortably with the violent yanking of her hair, but it was a critical moment for the CPR, and she couldn't let go. She kept trying to revive Rebecca despite the distractions. Even as the mother-in-law pinched her over and over again, she didn't let up. Isla sneered. She found Keira really stupid. Being so kind-hearted would only get her embroiled in a huge problem. The mother and son were clearly not good people. She got herself mixed up in big trouble. At this moment, several luxury cars drove quickly into the parking lot of the hospital. Before the car could even stop, a tall man jumped out. Frankie Allen, with a stern look on his face, led a group of bodyguards in black suits, and they quickly rushed up to the floor. Chapter 47. Savior. When Frankie rushed to the second floor, he immediately spotted his sister on the ground receiving CPR. Rebecca was pale and weak, and the sight of her made his heart stop. This was a hospital. Why was such a primitive method of resuscitation being used? Where were the machines? Why weren't the machines being used? A flurry of questions raced through Frankie's mind as he saw a middle-aged woman beating the person performing CPR on his sister. She yanked at the woman's hair, bellowing,
Go away! My daughter-in-law doesn't need to be saved. Wouldn't it be better if she just passed peacefully? We can't afford her treatment. Are you trying to drive our family to bankruptcy?
Rebecca's husband also said,
The cost of the treatment is 70,000 and the monthly medical fee is 10,000. I'm useless. Even if you bring me wife back, our family will still have to face this hardship. My brother-in-law's family isn't rich either. Otherwise, my wife wouldn't choose to give up.
Frankie's face darkened. He wanted to kill those two people. He was in control of the Allen family, and he understood what was happening from just those sentences. His sister was pampered and spoiled since childhood, and any piece of jewelry from her room was worth more than $70,000. But now she was getting killed by her husband and mother-in-law over that little amount of money. As he had this realization, he made his way to Rebecca without stopping. Rebecca's mother-in-law saw that Keira wouldn't move and noticed that Rebecca's hand twitched, indicating that she had been revived. The woman flew into a rage and tried to scratch Keira's face. She had long nails ready to disfigure Keira's face. Keira, detecting that Rebecca's heart had returned to a normal rhythm, as well as this elderly woman's intentions, quickly twisted her head and grabbed the woman's wrist while preparing to retaliate when an unknown man suddenly kicked the elderly woman's chest. The woman was kicked so hard that she tumbled backward, fell to the ground, and couldn't speak as she clutched her chest. The husband, seeing what happened, pointed at Frankie and yelled,
Who are you? This is too much. Not only did you torture my wife's corpse, but you even dared to lay hands on my mother. Call the police. I'm calling the police.
Frankie kicked the husband away and instructed his bodyguards coming up behind him.
Show them a lesson and call the police. Tell them that these two people have attempted to murder my sister for money.
Leaving behind those words, he hastily rushed to Rebecca and crouched down.
Rebecca, I'm here. Wake up.
Keira realized who he was and said in a calm voice,
Although her heartbeat is back, she still needs immediate surgery.
Thank you.
On his way here, Frankie had already made arrangements with a doctor. He left those words and carried Rebecca away. When the police arrived, they quickly confirmed the mother and husband's intent to murder for money and immediately arrested the two. The crowd that had gathered was told the truth, and they all gave Keira a thumbs up. Keira stayed behind to provide a statement to the police. Once she had signed her statement, she turned to go, only to see Isla still behind her. Isla was frowning. She could see that the brother who just arrived clearly held a high social position. If she had known that earlier, she would have let that stupid woman make the call. It was all Keira's fault. She had stolen the spotlight again. Nonetheless, a mocking expression appeared in her eyes.
Keira, I didn't expect you'd be so desperate to climb up the social ladder. Seeing that the infatuated woman was from excellent background, you must have put so much effort into saving her. What a shame. After everything, that brother didn't even give you a grateful glance.
After making her mockery, she left for Mrs. Olsen's ward. Keira watched her from behind, thinking back to how Isla had twisted the story around how she was thinking only of personal gain now. She couldn't help but find Isla spiteful. For one, Rebecca was in critical condition, and her brother would definitely have brought her for surgery immediately. Secondly, Keira saved a life, but she didn't expect anything in return. She touched her scalp and gasped in pain. She had been pulled so hard by that elderly woman that it still hurt. She smoothed out her messy hair, sighed, pulled out her phone, and sent a message to Louis before heading home. In the VIP ward on the 3rd floor, Louis thought back to what had happened in the car, and his heart beat faster. He frowned, suppressing his emergent feelings. He looked toward the door, but Keira still didn't appear. Was she also feeling shy? He frowned slightly at the thought. Also? It took over half an hour for him to receive a message from Keira on WhatsApp.
It's Horton. Something came up last minute. I'll be going home for the night.
Upon receiving this message, Louis strangely felt relieved, but he frowned involuntarily. What could be so important? Keira hailed a taxi home, took a bath, used a lot of conditioner on her hair, and finally managed to untangle it. Looking at the hair that had fallen, she felt a pang. Wasn't her hair also iron-rich? She ate a portion of liver for dinner, replenishing some of the iron she had lost, before taking out her laptop to continue with the unfinished work from the office. Nothing else happened that night. The next day, Keira arrived at the office early. She ran into Jalen at the office door. He'd gotten some sleep at home, and his dark circles had faded a lot. He was also less irritable. Seeing her come out of a taxi, he breathed a sigh of relief.
I went home last night and kept thinking that something was off. My cousin drove you home, so did that mean that you guys are now living together? Thankfully, you didn't come to work with him this morning.
Keira was speechless. She usually did come to work with Louis, but she didn't bother explaining. Jalen walked to her side, glanced at her, and said proudly,
I know why my cousin had a bad mood yesterday. I heard that he wanted to sign a contract with the Allen family, but the head of the Allen family, Frankie Allen, seems to have a bad relationship with my cousin. He's coming to the company to talk about business today, so my cousin must be feeling quite frustrated.
Keira paused. Frankie Allen? What was the name of Rebecca's brother from the day before? She had missed Frankie when he came into the Horton Group building accompanied by a secretary. Rebecca's surgery was very successful. She woke up this morning. Upon seeing her parents, who had rushed overnight, the three cried together for a long time. Afterward, Rebecca asked about her savior. However, that young lady left the night before. Seeing his sister's anxiety, Frankie promised that he would find her savior and express their gratitude properly. He had personally witnessed the efforts this woman went through to save his sister, hence deemed that the Allen family owed this woman a life. He only wondered what that young woman did for a living. Where did she work? As these thoughts were running in his head, he unexpectedly saw Keira, who was waiting for the elevator. Chapter 48. Solution. Frankie was slightly surprised. The young woman he saw at the hospital the day before had her hair disheveled by Rebecca's mother-in-law, so he didn't get a clear look at her face. This young woman looked so much like her. Frankie picked up his speed, trying to approach her to confirm his speculation. However, just at that moment, the elevator arrived and Keira and Jalen entered it. By the time Frankie got there, he only saw the elevator doors slowly closing. What an unfortunate coincidence. Frankie wasn't in a hurry, for the young lady had left her phone number when she called him the night before. After the negotiations with the Horton Group were over, he could call her to express his gratitude. He could discuss a proper way to thank her with his family. Keira didn't see Frankie. She went to the R&D department with Jalen. As soon as they entered the office, they saw their colleagues pulling their hair out in front of their computers.
Tomorrow is Friday, and Vice President Horton is really making things difficult for us by asking us to submit the plan.
I think we can give up now. This task is impossible for a human to complete.
Jalen went home to sleep last night. Does that mean he has given up?
I wonder how Mr. Olson is doing. Could she bring us a surprise?
Luca immediately said,
Don't say that. It will put too much pressure on her. No matter how talented Keira is, she can't be compared to Dr. Sal's age. It's a factor.
Everyone nodded in agreement. When they saw Keira and Jalen, the group immediately started gossiping excitedly.
Jalen, did you meet Dr. Sal's at the gathering of last night?
Jalen rolled his eyes.
How could Dr. South possibly attend such a gathering? If he showed up, that bunch of people would eat him alive.
Did you meet Mr. Morgan then? Did he say that what Dr. South is researching lately?
No, he didn't.
Jalen Riley suddenly looked at Keira.
But we could ask Keira. She seems to be on good terms with him.
What? Miss Olson, you actually know Samuel Morgan? That means you might as well as know Dr. South.
Everyone looked at Keira together.
Miss Olson, could you introduce us to Dr. South if there's a chance in the future?
Keira canned the group and saw their faces filled with joy and expectancy. She smiled faintly.
Sure, we might even work together someday.
Everyone burst out laughing at her words.
Let's forget about that. I don't even dare to dream of it.
I'm content just to see Dr. South in person.
If we could get his guidance, it would be such a benefit.
Everyone laughed and talked, and finally they began to work when Jalen started yelling angrily. Keira took her laptop to her own office. Before she entered, Jalen stopped her.
Don't push yourself. The intensity of this project far exceeds our team's capability. Our superiors are aware of this. They won't let Jake hurt the team's morale.
Listening to his words of comfort, Keira smiled.
Don't worry. Trust me.
Jake stood outside the office, gazing at Keira. She had beautiful features, and the confident and bright smile on her face reminded him of her university days. It seemed like any hardship could be easily overcome in her presence. But where did her confidence come from? Apart from Dr. South, no one could complete such an arduous task in such a short time. He turned around, walked to the resting area, and called Isla on his cell phone.
Before tomorrow, can Dr. South send me the solution?
Isla tried to stall.
Jake, Dr. South is very busy. He's abroad.
Jake said irritably.
If you keep stalling, Keira Olsen and the others will solve the problem.
Isla sounded a little panic-stricken.
I'll tell him to hurry up.
Jake narrowed his eyes abruptly.
Isla, you're not lying to me, are you?
Of course not. I'll go and talk to Dr. South now.
Isla hung up and became frantic. These 2 days, she had been using Mrs. Olsen's email to send Dr. South messages, but his replies were ruthless, saying that he was on a business trip and not to be disturbed. She wouldn't be able to provide a solution by the following day. When Jake saw that she had lost her value, he might call off the engagement. No, she absolutely couldn't allow that to happen. Determination suddenly flashed across her eyes, and she entered the ward to see Mrs. Olsen.
Mom, do you know the Allens from Clans? Jake wants to make contact with them.
Mrs. Olsen's condition had been stable for the past few days, and she was ready to be discharged the following day. She had been reading a book in bed. Upon hearing Isla's words, her fingers tightened, but then she looked up and said,
No.
Isla's eyes flickered. Mrs. Olsen's reaction clearly hinted that she knew the Allens, but didn't want to introduce Isla to them. Isla decided this selfish woman wasn't fit to be a mother. She wasn't like Poppy, who had always indulged her since childhood. Now that Mrs. Olsen was unwilling to help her, what should she do? Isla was truly in a panic. Keira didn't work on the entire project on her own. Her colleagues in Group 1 helped a lot. By the time they clocked out, the general plan was almost determined and just needed a bit more refinement. Keira brought her laptop to the underground parking lot. After getting into Lewis's Bentley, she noticed that he wasn't in the car. The driver explained,
Mr. Horton has an appointment tonight. He told me to send you home first.
Keira didn't think much of it.
All right.
However, Lewis didn't come back the whole night. The next day, Keira brought the plan that she worked on overnight with her work full of excitement. As soon as she arrived in the research department, she saw Jake standing in the rest area with a cup of coffee, clearly waiting for her.
Just a friendly reminder, Keira. Today is the last day. If you don't submit the solution before the end of work, I win our bet. And you'll have to take responsibility for what you said.
Keira didn't know what to say. Did this man have nothing to do all day? She rolled her eyes and walked to her office, but Jake followed her.
If you work for me in the future, I won't treat you badly. At least I can introduce you to Dr. South.
Keira scoffed.
Don't bother.
Jake said angrily.
I know you've got on good terms with Samuel Morgan and think you don't need my help, but do you think he will introduce Dr. South to you? He just takes you as a plaything. If he had any real feelings for you, he would have helped you to solve the problem.
I don't need help.
Jake laughed.
Really? Other people praised you as a genius, and you really begin to compare yourself to Dr. South, thinking you can come up with a solution?
My solution is already complete.
Keira's laughing eyes were full of irony.
On the other hand, Vice President Horton, did you get Dr. South's solution yet?
Chapter 49. Completion. Jake exclaimed in shock.
You finished it? How is that possible?
Having graduated in the field of energy, he was well aware of the complexity involved in the work. That's why he didn't find it odd when Isla said that Dr. South needed more time and hadn't yet given him the solution. How on earth could Keira have finished so quickly? Keira narrowed her eyes.
I'll organize everything and send it to you later, and you'll know. Jake, Don't forget what you promised me.
After saying this, she entered Group 1's office. As soon as she walked in, members of her group surrounded her. Luca, being vigilant, glared at Jake.
Did he belittle you again with Dr. South?
The rest of the members immediately chimed in.
Miss Olsen, don't take him seriously.
Exactly, being so competent at your age already makes you top-notch. Don't compare yourself with Dr. South.
You're already amazing. You're so young, yet you're more impressive than anyone else here.
Jalen came out of his office. From the looks of it, he must have stayed over at the company again the night before. He frowned and looked at Keira.
Don't worry, I stayed up all night and figured out a rough solution to the problem. If we work extra time today, even if we can't provide a complete solution, at least a suggestion is enough.
He had also sent a WhatsApp message to his cousin explaining the situation in the R&D department. Reporting Jake's pressure on the department, Jalen knew that Lewis would support him. Keira was touched by their kind words. She smiled.
Thank you, but it's not necessary. I've already finished it.
Jalen waved his hand.
You don't have to worry about this anymore. I'll talk to... What?
His eyes widened in surprise.
You finished?
The others also looked at her in disbelief.
Miss Olsen, what did you just say? Am I hallucinating from fatigue?
Luca laughed bitterly.
Keira, don't joke around with us.
Keira laughed.
I'm about to send an email and I will CC everyone.
She walked into her office with her laptop. The department members and Jalen stood there, looking at each other, still in disbelief. It wasn't until the sound of a new email pinged from someone's computer that everyone returned to their desks and opened their email. Sure enough, they saw an email sent by Keira. Everyone immediately downloaded the attachments and opened them. The content left them stunned. For a moment, the department went quiet. Seeing everyone engrossed in reading the solution, Keira quietly left the office and headed to the rooftop. With her work completed, she intended to meet Lewis to retrieve the book on neurology. She hadn't forgotten about making the medicine for old Mrs. Horton. Rooftop, inside the office. Lewis was reviewing some documents when Tom entered abruptly.
Boss, Miss Olsen is here to see you.
He paused, the pen leaving a trail on the paper. At the small of his back, it felt like he could still feel her soft touch, which slowly turned into burning heat. He moistened his lips, his voice deep.
Enter.
As soon as Keira entered, she saw Lewis quietly there. He didn't look up and said softly,
I know about the research and development department. It's alright if you guys can't find the solution. The company has a complete set of rules and regulations that will protect your legal rights.
I didn't come here because of the R&D department's issues. I came here because I was thinking about you.
Her voice trailed off and a sudden itch in her throat made her pause. Lewis's hand shook, ruining a document that had just been printed. His throat tightened a little. He slowly looked up and saw Keira clearing her throat before speaking again.
I was thinking about your book, the one from the library.
Lewis was speechless. He took a deep breath but felt a little desolate deep down. He casually picked up that book from his desk and handed it to Keira. When she took it, he said lightly,
Next time, don't stop in the middle of your sentence.
Keira happily took the book, oblivious to his strange remark, and said casually,
Right, thank you.
She then turned to leave. Only after she had left the room did Lewis drop his gaze. He laughed softly. Interestingly, Keira hadn't taken the kiss in the car to heart while he had been overthinking it for 2 days. He was overreacting. What's more, Keira already had a boyfriend. Lewis regained his usual calm and composure. Now that the R&D work was completed, Keira completely let go and spent the whole day researching Alzheimer's disease. As it approached clock-off time, the quiet office finally stirred. The director of the R&D department and an angry Jake walked in. Jalen had just finished verifying Keira's solution and found no problems at all. He excitedly informed the director,
Our company really struck gold this time. Keira's solution will be as good as Dr. South's.
The director frowned while Jake snorted.
Yeah, you're right. They're identical.
At first, Jalen didn't catch his meaning.
She's as good as Dr. South.
As he said this, he suddenly froze.
What do you mean? I mean, she stole Dr. South's solution.
After Jake finished speaking, he sneered at Keira.
In the afternoon, I received Dr. South's solution, and it's almost identical to yours. I wondered how you seemed so composed, and it turned out you had this in mind. Did you think that because you sent your email earlier than Dr. South, the solution will be considered yours? Keira Olsen, you're incredibly naive to think that by changing a few details we wouldn't be able to tell. How dare you steal from Dr. South?
Jalen frowned.
There must be some misunderstanding here. Keira has been working in the company with us all these days. Some of this content was even completed by us.
Even though this part only accounted for 20% of the entire solution. Upon hearing this, Jake immediately responded.
What kind of misunderstanding? The two solutions are identical. Do you mean to say that rather than Keira stealing from Dr. South, Dr. South stole from Keira? Do you think that's possible?
One was a respected doctoral scholar, and the other was an undergraduate. It was clear who was more trustworthy. Jalen was rendered speechless. Keira frowned as she listened to their conversation. It was unlikely Dr. South would have sent an email to Jake, so the only explanation was that someone had forged her solution to seem as if it had come from Dr. South. Jake intended to use this opportunity to suppress her and her team. Was that it? What a joke! Keira said mildly.
Couldn't there be a third possibility?
Chapter 50. Self-Proof. The director was slightly stunned.
What third possibility?
However, Jake rebuked sternly.
Keira, stop making excuses here. I advise you to admit your mistakes obediently. The company may be lenient in punishing you for your first offense.
Jalen immediately turned his eyes to her.
Keira, explain to us what exactly is going on.
Keira answered.
The third possibility is that Dr. South's plan never arrived at Jake's hand. He's slandering me.
Upon hearing this, Jalen glared angrily at Jake. Jake, however, seemed surprised at her response. He chuckled and said,
When we were in school, I didn't realize you had such a thick skin. Of course, I wouldn't accuse you without solid evidence.
Jalen asked.
What evidence?
Jake pulled out his phone, opened a screenshot, and handed it to Jalen.
This is the plan that Dr. South sent to Isla last night. Isla was delayed due to an issue and forwarded to me in the afternoon. From the timing, Dr. South's submission was earlier than Keira's. If that is not enough for clarifying things, I have a witness.
Keira narrowed her eyes. It turned out that the culprit wasn't Jake, but Isla. She thought back carefully. Last night after work, she passed by the second floor of the inpatient department. At that time, Mrs. Olsen went in for an examination, and Isla had a stomachache. So Keira went with Mrs. Olsen instead. At that time, Keira's computer was left in the ward. But how could Isla know her computer's password? Keira clenched her fists slightly.
Nothing to say now, is there?
With a cold laugh, Jake said to the general manager,
This incident is absolutely appalling. The company must deal strictly with Keira. If necessary, we can tell the police. After all, she dared to steal Dr. South's research. If Dr. South hears about this, I'm afraid he'll never work with Horton Group again.
The general manager hastily spoke.
This scandal is also harmful to the company. Let's hold off on reporting it to the police. The administrative department has already left for the day. How about this? First thing Monday morning, we'll submit all the evidence to the administrative department to see what they decide to do.
Jake didn't object. He looked at Keira and said suggestively,
Spend the next 2 days thinking hard. If you realize your mistake, you can come to me. If your apology is sincere, I may consider not publicizing this matter and treat it as a minor blunder. But of course, If you don't repent, don't blame me for not considering our past as classmates.
Having dropped this hint, he and the general manager strode off. Once the two men had left, the members of Group 1 gathered around Keira.
There must be some misunderstanding here, Miss Olsen. Did you ask Samuel Morgan for help?
Keira was touched that the team didn't blame her.
Don't worry. I'll prove my innocence.
If she revealed her true identity and explained the situation, all the misunderstandings would be cleared up. However, Jalen didn't believe her the last time. The patent certificate and company seal that could prove her identity had been taken abroad by Samuel for a project. It seemed he would return next Monday. Thinking about this, she smiled and looked at her colleagues around her. By that time, their expressions would surely be humorous. After leaving work, Keira went to the underground parking lot. She got into the Bentley but didn't see Lewis. However, Tom was in the passenger seat.
Mr. Horton has meeting to attend to. He will leave later.
Keira immediately said,
I can take a taxi.
You don't have to, Mr. Horton told me to drop you off first.
After Tom instructed the driver to start the car, he glanced at her, dissatisfied.
Miss Olsen, you shouldn't rush things in your line of work. Dr. South is not someone you can interfere with casually. You created quite a stir to the R&D department.
Keira raised an eyebrow in response but remained silent. Tom continued.
Don't think that being protected by old Mrs. Horton and the boss allows you to do anything you want. In the field of research, theft and plagiarism are the most intolerable.
Keira pulled out her earphones, put them in her ears, and blocked out his voice. Tom was speechless. The car soon arrived at the hospital. As Keira was climbing up the stairs, she was stopped by Taylor on the second floor.
Shirley wants to see you.
She followed Taylor to Mrs. Olsen's ward. Mrs. Olsen was about to be discharged, and Aunt South had already packed her things but hadn't left. They were obviously waiting for Keira. Mrs. Olsen saw her come in and immediately asked,
Keira, what's this about you stealing Dr. South's plan? I don't believe that's something you would do.
Taylor disdainfully said,
With the evidence now at hand, Jake only gave her a warning because she's part of the Olsen family. What's there to not believe? Shirley, you trust her too much. I've said long ago that with the blood of Poppy Hill running through her veins, she can't be a good person.
Mrs. Olsen shouted angrily.
Shut up! Keira, speak up. What's going on?
Mrs. Olsen's worried expression made Keira's eyes a little moist. She knew that Mrs. Olsen genuinely cared about her. Just as she was about to speak up, Isla acted as if she had been wronged.
Keira, how could you be so foolish? I know you want to achieve something at Horton Group to earn more respect from old Mrs. Horton and Mr. Horton. But you can't just take whatever you want. If you wanted Dr. South's plan, you could have told me, and I would have given it to you. How could you steal it from my computer?
Steal? Keira let out a cold chuckle. As expected, Isla was behind everything. Taking a step forward, she asked,
Who's the one who took things without asking?
Isla put on a wronged face.
What do you mean? Are you trying to have me cover up for you? Or I should tell people that your plan is the same as Dr. South and everything is just a coincidence?
Keira calmly responded,
Of course, it's not a coincidence. You obviously stole my plan.
Nonsense!
Taylor became so furious that he picked up a broom from the floor and started hitting her.
You made a mistake, and now you're trying to throw dirt on your sister? You deserve a beating!
Mrs. Olsen immediately stopped him.
Taylor, don't be so reckless.
Taylor yelled.
Shirley, did you hear that? She's so arrogant! An undergraduate student is claiming that such a complex plan from Dr. South is hers! It's just a joke. Utterly ridiculous. She's simply not worth your concern. She'll have to bear the consequences of her own evil deeds.
However, Mrs. Olsen said,
But if Horton Group calls the police, Keira could end up in jail.
She took out her phone.
It's really quite simple to deal with this matter. As long as Dr. South doesn't pursue it, It will be fine. I'll call South right now.
With that, she dialed Dr. South through WhatsApp voice call.